Okay. So Adam, so great having you back on the podcast.
So good to be here.
You're like my first repeat guest.
Yes.
And I remember the last time we got off the phone or our conversation ended, it's like, dude, the next time we talk, we need to get weird. You remember that?
Yeah.
I think that was very strategic and methodic. So if you haven't heard Adam yet, go back to the episode I recorded with him. It's called Talking to Plants or something along those lines. And that's going to be your good intro. And then this is phase 2 that opens your mind to what we're about to dive into.
Here we go.
So are you ready to get a little bit weird?
Let's get super weird.
Okay. I just love reflecting on the story of how our paths crossed. And so just reflect on that really quick. When we met, you reached out to me through email. I received a message from a stranger at that point in time. And you said something like, hey, I need 10 to 30 pounds of bison manure. 10 to 30 gallons of bison manure.
Yeah.
Like, what does a gallon of bison manure look like? And, we didn't have a rapport or relationship. And my first instinct was like, dude, this guy doesn't get it. Like, this manure is a sacred resource. This is, Mother Nature's gift to cycling the fertility that we're trying to build at our ranch. Who does this guy think he is coming out and just taking 20
stealing our gold,
10 to 30 gallons of this good stuff? But you were just persistent and you kind of explained, hey, I'm looking to make biodynamic 500 horn manure. And I didn't know what that was at that point in time. So I looked it up and then I was flattered because I was like, okay, well, this guy is actually trying to source maybe some of the best stuff out there. He's not messing around. And so then you came out and we hung out, we collected manure, we did some agnihotra, which was pretty amazing. We'll get into that today. We did some dowsing and I think a friendship was born. And so thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for y'all have done so much in this field of education, awareness, regenerative agriculture on boots on the ground, which has been so needed. There's so much theory and speakers and books out there, but for the folks who are actually on the ground, getting the communities together, moving functional things forward, y'all are doing an incredible job.
Well, thank you.
And I think, as we get into biodynamics, I think this is one of the things that it has been in my life is it always draws me towards more rich people and experiences. The whole thing of I was looking for bison manure and I found you and Rome Ranch and Force of Nature Meats and these incredible conferences that y'all put on, and all of it came from just looking for a material to bury in a horn for a winter. It could have been anyone. Yeah. I thought it was going to be an 80-year-old farmer, but no. After meeting y'all that first day, I went home and told my wife, I was like, I think I met my people. Like they're doing it. They are excited and passionate and doing good things at big scale.
Yeah,
so,
that's cool, man. Absolutely. It reminds me of just this idea of where energy goes, energy flows, and life begets life, and it's this virtuous cycle.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of those kind of foundational principles I can grasp with biodynamics. But to begin, how do you define biodynamics? What is it, and what is it rooted in?
So biodynamics, a definition would just be kind of we're looking at biology, the living systems and structures and communities of this planet. And we're not just looking at the dead dissectable version, the corpse on a table that we can say these are ligaments and those are muscles, but we're looking at the actual living dynamic version of it. We know that when we die or an animal dies, something is gone, some spirit, some soul, whatever you want to qualify that as. Anyone who's watched something transition from life to death, that thing that moves on, that's what we're really interested in. Like, how does that work? And that really gets into these like dynamic interplay. Days are different than nights. Cycles of summer different than cycles of winter. We interact differently during different seasons and cycles of ourselves. So it really tries to look at what is actually happening in the living world.
I think everyone can relate to like that seasonal shift and that push-pull we're going into, fall, quickly into winter here. And for me, I always find myself going not more dormant in a sense, but my energy is going more inward than outward. Like in the summer, I find myself outdoors, celebrating, shirt off, receiving all that sunlight energy, and then really motivated to like run and do cardio. And then in the winter, it's the opposite, like a bear.
Yeah. Coffee, books, naps.
So those are the cycles, or at least an example of a tangible cycle.
Absolutely. It's very much everything gets into this inward and outward expression. We're on this planet Earth whizzing through the cosmos at incredible speeds, and there's no up and down as we say, but there's an inward and an outward pulsing. And that happens on every scale, on the smallest scale of your heart's beating to the largest scale of the earth is exhaling during the summertime and throwing fruits into the treetops, and it's inhaling during the wintertime, digesting leaf matter and field stubble so that it can be ready and fertile for the springtime.
So how did you find yourself beginning to appreciate those cycles and that movement within the greater ecosystem that we're a part of?
Honestly, I think it really started when I was alpine climbing in the North Cascades in Washington State, because I would notice that during different moon cycles, we would have different successes in climbing. So if we were just going to go try to, let's say, climb a north route on Mount Rainier, some bold endeavor, we would definitely not plan it just before a new moon, because when we were climbing just before a new moon, everything felt heavy. We felt just wanting to sleep in, not being very motivated. It felt like a refrigerator was on your back trying to climb up a mountain. But if you planned those big, ambitious trips just before a full moon, when all of the energy was at its apex outward, then it felt like you were being pulled up by kind of marionette strings. You weren't even struggling. You were just chatting, having a great time, telling jokes while you hiked up the mountain with your heavy pack, and everything felt simple and easeful and just joyful. And so it was kind of this contemplation of, oh, okay, if the moon has that much impact on tides and on us, then how do we integrate that into foods? And obviously there's tons of stories about your old timer farmers who just knew these things. This was old folk knowledge. And so along that path, I found the biodynamic calendar. And when I started to correlate climbing to the biodynamic calendar, started to have a whole lot more success climbing on fruit days than on root days, which is just kind of a fun personal experiment.
That is really cool. I think about these cycles. Well, first of all, back up, I think typically people are more focused on the energy cycles or the energy influence on our bodies and on our minds based on maybe the sun. And because we function in the daytime, we sleep in the nighttime. And so like as not being a nocturnal being, there's maybe not as much of an appreciation for what's happening with the moon. However, this doesn't seem that wild or far out to me, because on our ranch, whenever we have a full moon cycle and we have pregnant bison, it's very likely that could time to where the night of the full moon, some kind of forces are going to happen to where we have massive birthing that happens overnight. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
That's one, example. And then another example anecdotally that I've heard is just on full moon nights, like ER rooms are just absolutely bananas, because humans are just being a little bit more careless, a little bit more reckless, and getting into trouble.
Yeah, and on a purely physiological standpoint, one of my dear friends is a pediatric ICU doctor, and she mentioned that absolutely we see the highest incidence of pediatric seizures during full moons, which correlates to the amount of energy is in the top of the organism, maybe too much energy. So yeah, it's and that's really what biodynamics gets into. It looks at the content of the individual thing, the plant or the person, but it also appreciates and acknowledges the greater context of your place, your property, the boundaries of your property, and even greater into the greater context of what's the moon doing? What are the greater celestial planetary bodies in our solar system doing, and how are they impacting what plants are able to do or not able to do. So going back to your question of where did biodynamics start from, it started from a series of 7 lectures given in the 1920s by a man named Rudolf Steiner, who at the time was a kind of a spiritual scientist, and farmers were just asking, hey, what are your thoughts on farming? Because after they started using some of the industrial bagged fertilizers, they noticed that the vitality and quality of their food was decreasing, and they were concerned. So for 10 days, Rudolf Steiner was invited to this series of about 500 different farmers in Austria, and he just gave a series of 7 lectures. And out of those 7 lectures came his Biodynamic Agriculture book, and everything else has come out of that. And if you read that book, it's pretty cryptic. And I've really enjoyed this Agriculture Abridged by Jeff Poppin. It kind of simplifies some pretty cryptic words from a person who wasn't a farmer, but he just had some very intriguing insight on how life and life processes work. So that's really where it came from. And so we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of that lecture series this year. So very appropriate that we're sitting here now.
That's amazing. We I read that book. You might have recommended it. That was kind of a starting point for me to better understand biodynamic agriculture. And within the first, maybe like 2 or 3 pages, they got into this concept of quantum physics, which I would be too intimidated to even try to explain this or understand this. But what I really took away as one of like these key core principles that has really expanded how I view land and view relationships and view energy is this whole concept of the observer and a phenomena being intricately connected. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like what you look for is what you will find.
Absolutely. And, the observer affects the experiment.
Yes.
And on the human scale, there's something called a polyvagal theory, and my wife is a trauma-informed therapist, and it's the same idea of if I come into a room expecting that you're upset with me or that you're mad at something I've done, even though you're totally happy, you're happy to see me. None of this is true, but in my body, I think you're pretty upset with me. So I come in feeling kind of shameful, kind of standoffish, and now you, who walked into the room expecting to be in a joyful experience of sharing, feel this from me, and you kind of shut down also. And so now, in a very personal way, we see what we expected to see.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you see that with dogs too, all the time.
Huge.
Pets, they're so sensitive to or in tune with their owner or their master. They can just feel that energy. But even, I don't know, remembering when I was a child, when my mom walked in, I knew exactly if she was in a good mood or a bad mood before she said a word, just based on this energy field that she carried. And now that I'm a parent, I can have the same experience with my child. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know there was a name to that, polyvagal theory.
Yeah. It's a good one to just, appreciate where our minds, hearts, and bodies are at before we enter into an interaction with others.
Yeah.
Because we're moving so quickly that sometimes we don't even know where our heads are at when we sit down to do something, and then we create an unexpected series of events.
Absolutely. And I think with agriculture, with co-creating on landscapes, it's a human tendency to look out and to almost find the things that they don't desire. So like you're always more likely going to identify undesirables. So in like our context, that would be mesquite trees or prickly pear cactuses or ash junipers, things like this that typically we're told we should not have on our landscape. But once you shift that perspective and you start saying, well, what do I want to see? Then you start seeing the things that you desire, and they just pop up. They manifest in front of you. And I have a really terrible story about like when this really clicked for me. I almost got bit by a rattlesnake because it was very obvious there was a rattlesnake underneath my child's stroller, and it was rattling. But as the observer to that phenomena, there was no comprehension or even thought that that might be a snake. And so I was thinking maybe it's a hummingbird, maybe it's a cricket, maybe it's a weird frog, and I almost got bit by that snake. And so again, like just if I would have at least had any kind of comprehension or cognitive open-mindedness to think that was a snake, I would have identified that way before it struck at me.
Yikes.
You know what I mean?
It's a spicy situation.
Yeah. So, well, this is, we're getting into some of the topics that I wanted to go to, but in your opinion, what's been the most impactful or transformative change in your mindset as a result of biodynamics?
I think probably the biggest shift is this idea of everything is an indicator, and everything is trying to inform you as the land steward, as a co-creator, and to help you understand what the land is needing, what your crop is needing. And so just as you mentioned, so often when we walk into a growing space with a client or a landowner, we quickly see, well, that's the weed that I don't want. That before we even get into all the things that they do want, what are they striving for? What do they hope to see on their land in 5, 10, 25 years? We get that thing keeps coming back. And there's this frustration and animosity and competition, me versus land kind of mentality right there, head-to-head fighting, attacking, pulling, cutting, spraying, killing dynamic, instead of kind of softening and like, what is that thing telling me? Why are the conditions conducive to that living thing over any others here now? Because nature is always going to self-prune itself. It's always going to be moving towards more complexity and awareness. It's going to be evolving towards more adaptation, and it's going to be trying to weed out the wick. Sorry, I'm having a hard time talking this morning. It's going to weed out the old and the sick so that it's always getting a stronger system. So when we look at weeds, for example, generally a lot of the weeds that we see as undesirable are thorny, deep tap roots, can't pull them out, continue to sprout from their buds like mesquites. But that deep taproot is sending down basically mineral harvesting drill bits to pull up minerals, drop it in its leaf structure, and build more mineral-rich soil for other plants to use. And so the answer is, those weeds are here because I have mineral deficient soils. And if I fix the mineral problem and make it more bioavailable to living soils, then other plants that are more desirable will come and inhabit that. And same thing with insects. It's this thing of, why are they here? What are they telling me? Insects have a very simple gut that can only consume simple sugars, whereas we have pretty complex guts that want amino acids and proteins and lipids and fats and all these higher end nutritive abilities that plants bring. And so if a plant is of higher nutritive quality, insects will not eat it. So if you see insects chewing on your whatever, it's a good indicator of like, hey, we can do better here. There's room for improvement. And so I think the biggest thing that biodynamics has brought into my life is just this curiosity of what's going on here? What am I missing? And just kind of a playfulness to just ponder and contemplate instead of having to know the right answer, and being willing to just find my own personal path. And I think probably the biggest thing is that acknowledgement of our own innate intuition is a beautiful, powerful thing that we often kind of get beaten out of us through our own schooling. So really just kind of given permission to just be quiet and still and listen to what strange curiosity might emerge. Like, I should probably go find 30 gallons of bison manure and see what comes out of that.
I think that's so well said. And I'm thinking, listening, looking into nature, trusting your instincts, going back to like more of the conventional mindset where you have these indicators, and we'll just, for this sake of argument, it can be anything, but we'll say thistles. I feel like thistles are all over the world, and typically regarded as non-desirable. So in the common setting, the response is, hey, I got to remove those thistles pronto, either chemically, mechanically, with a till or shredder or whatever. What happens and how does that impact the system's desire to be more complex over time?
And the question is, what happens when we continue to remove them?
Exactly.
Basically, we just stunt the successional system that's already in progress. So, succession is a topic that everyone should just look up on Google some images, and you'll see, our first primary successional species are woody, thick taproots, netroots, things that are just going to hold the soil together and start pulling up minerals. Usually they're thorny and pokey and poisonous because they're basically trying to keep out all of nature and say, hey, look, there's been a disturbance. Y'all messed this area up. Now we're fixing it. And so, yeah, they're pokey and thorny and thistles and they sting you. And they're basically letting you know that just stay out. I'm working hard over here fixing the problem. And so whenever we chop those down or poison them, we're just resetting the successional process so that those are the only plants that have conditions conducive to live. And so we're just slowing down everything that we want to do. A different approach would be, there's a couple great books, the Pfeiffer, What Weeds Are Telling You, and Weeds Control Without Poisons. And they both, you can look up the thistle and it'll tell you exactly, thistles are an indicator of deficiencies of these minerals. And so how we might do that is, if we're going to mow something like that, go ahead and find what minerals are deficient in that area, make a brew of the biodynamic preparations as well as those specific liquid fermented minerals, probably from advancing ecological agriculture, because they have great specific fermentations of specific minerals, and then spray it on those thistles and then mow them. So that we're basically speeding succession up a year or two, as if those thistles had already pulled up the deep minerals and laid them down for 3 years in a row. And now you're working with kind of that natural system and its indicator instead of against it.
Yeah. The thistles are such an interesting one. In our experience, we had this one patch on the property where we had, it was a monoculture of thistles. And this had already been a couple years into our process where we recognized that thistle was serving a purpose. And through the succession kind of trophic levels, they'd more or less, as an annual, we don't really have many thistles anymore. I kind of miss them. In retrospect.
They're beautiful. Those big purple
amazing. Flowers
are stunning.
Bumblebees will come up to them.
Oh, yeah.
They're just the coolest.
Yeah.
But there was this one area where these thistles just wouldn't abate. They wouldn't ameliorate. And so we actually did some digging in there, and it was an old battery mine where we found these things all over the property where there would just be like 30 buried tractor batteries,
Wow.
20 years old, and really pretty spots too, like under live oaks or in like these awesome meadows. And so, those thistles, they were working that whole time.
Yeah. They're like, oh, I got a lead battery. Yep, I can mineral accumulate this.
Yes.
And that's really pretty much all of the different biodynamic preparations that we'll talk about are all heavy mineral accumulating plants that then we're using for other reasons to like reinoculate the health and nourishment. And oftentimes you'll see those growing in old burnt spots, where the soil has been completely sterilized. It's been kind of capped over like fired clay pottery. And so the only thing that can get through that capped soil is the thistles, because they just have these, driller roots on them that can, basically frack the soil to get to what nothing else can get through.
Right. And like with a thistle, I think, we've bought thistle tea before at a natural grocery store, or tea bags, and you make it at home and it's a detoxer. Do you find that some of the other plant species out there that serve maybe a health role for us as consumers also serve a similar role to the earth?
Absolutely.
Or to the soil?
Absolutely. And, we'll get into that when we get into the biodynamic preparations. All of them are various different beneficial healing herbs for humans in different ways. And yeah, anyone who's an herbalist will find some great similarity in like, oh yeah, I use chamomile for calming and going to sleep and resting and relaxing. And in biodynamics, we'll use fermented chamomile flowers to put on a field to help it calm and rest and digest this fall stubble for the wintertime so that it's ready to be available for springtime. Things like nettles, nettles and thistles are similar but different. Stinging nettles are, as nutritive as your sea vegetables, your kelps and your algae and things like that. But same thing. We just have this highly available, bioavailable nutrient source harnessed into a plant that now we can use for our various purposes.
That's amazing. And a couple of times you've touched on these natural systems moving towards higher complexity.
Mm-hmm.
Can you touch on the difference between maybe complexity and something that's complex, a system that's complex versus a system that's complicated?
Yeah, so a system that's complicated might be like your computer. We got parts and pieces from all over the world, incredible, interesting heavy metals that allow for high conductivity. But if one component of that computer breaks, the whole thing is done, no matter how many moving components it has. The whole thing shuts down. So that's complicated versus complex, which is what nature is always moving towards. It has multiple redundancies. So if a thistle gets overgrazed or it's gone, there's another mineral accumulating plant right behind it. The mesquite, the silverleaf nightshade, the many other weeds that nobody tends to like, all of those are all serving the same function as moving the system from bare capped earth to a hyper-complex savanna prairie ecosystem with deep roots, shallow roots, soil that's 4 feet deep, incredible trees, 400 years old, and a prairie ecosystem rich in beneficial virus, beneficial fungi, beneficial bacteria, and a myriad of hundreds of different species of living beings that are all every year taking in the imprint of the summer cycle, building that into their seed head. And next year, that seed is now more ready to grow in conditions exactly where it is. The beauty of seed harvesting is each year your seed gets more ready to grow in that exact soil, that exact climate, that exact rainfall or drought or heat. And so each year that system is becoming more complex, more resilient, more redundant. And if you clear cut an acre of it, the rest of it is going to seep into that area and heal it as quickly as possible.
It's like the phrase nature abhors a vacuum, right? Like always will come in and fill that space is what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
And so as a human with our relative simple minds, we're good at building complicated systems, but how can we play a part in a complex system that will truly never really be able to realize all the relationships and everything that's happening?
Yeah, great question. I think one of my favorite phrases from Buckminster Fuller is he said that humans are local information harvesters and synthesizers, and that's kind of our function in universe. And so I think really it's looking at what we're trying to manage, the whole that we're trying to manage, whether it's 1/8 of an acre in our backyard or 1,000 acres or more, and saying, what am I doing and what is the land allowing? And so the whole kind of big picture of biodynamics is looking at the property as a whole and just as a human being as a whole, and it has organ systems and sensory systems that can kind of be self-sustaining. We want that land to basically be able to make all of the minerals and biological activities and scents, and basically be a living organism that all of the inputs ideally come from that land instead of constantly pulling in more inputs, in importing more things to the land. So I think kind of I think I might have just lost my train of thought, but I think that's kind of the question is just looking at how can we be a good steward,
Sure,
and what's needed, to do that.
I mean, it really wasn't that long ago when these ecosystems worked at really high levels on that kind of closed loop principle where all the fertility, all the nutrient, all the cycles of nature were working within its own boundaries. And it's only been relatively recent, since maybe the advent of modern kind of industrial agriculture, that we've stripped away that model, and it's been more based on constantly importing these resources.
Absolutely. And as soon as we put up fences and disallowed classic migratory paths of bison and roving ruminants, we shifted all of those nutrient cycles.
So we've talked a little bit about these cycles, and I've heard you speak about inward and outward cycles and energies within nature. Can you elaborate on that and maybe provide some examples?
Yeah, I think I didn't bring one little visual that I was planning on, but here's something that we can look at if you're watching this. If you're listening, what I just pulled out was a dodecahedral shape, which has all the nested platonic solids inside of it. And so this is really kind of how nature operates. It's constantly nesting more complexity inside of itself. So, the rumor has it that eventually, a long time ago, we were this, blob of biomass living, and we noticed that a mitochondria cell was floating around next to us, and we snatched it up and said, wow, this thing's just harvesting and making power. Let's go ahead and pull that in, and it'll be part of us now. And now, we have these incredible mitochondrial power factories inside of our cells. And so we're constantly, life is constantly incorporating newness into itself, so that it can then express outwardly. But, to what you asked about outward and inward, a plant is this constant outward-inward process. Springtime hits, it grows up out of the soil, it moves outward and upward. Eventually, it's going to put on a fruit that's going to then compress inward and make a seed, and that seed's going to drop off, and the cycle of outward expression and then involution and compression is going to occur again to make a new seed. Same with humans, right? We grow old enough to reproduce, and our bodies are creating eggs and sperm, which is just a highly condensed version of everything that we are and everything that all the generations before us have been, so that it can then express and expand into a whole nother thing that can reproduce and do the same thing. So everything on its own level is this outward expression followed by an inward expression, kind of this pumping, pulsing cycle of life. And when we can just acknowledge that that's the thing, we can work with it. And that's really what biodynamics tries to do, and particularly the morning and evening cycles of outward movement from energy from soil into sky in the early morning, and then an inward movement from energy from sky into soil in the evening. And then that broader cycle would be, great growth and outward movement in the summer, fruit producing, harvesting, and then leaves dropping, everything moves underground, inward, saps move underground for the wintertime. And so, from the microcosmic to the macrocosmic, we have these inward, outward pulsing cycles that when we acknowledge, we can work with.
So how do you work with that? Or what are some examples of how you might think about interacting with land or plants in rhythm with that natural cycle?
Sure. So, for the plant, the question would be, what is the plant? Is it a root, or a shoot? And where's the energy going to be at? Let's look at the day cycle. In the morning, the energy is moving from Earth up into the sky. And about noon, maybe 1 o'clock, apex of the day, that energy is going to start moving back from sky down into Earth again. So if you're going to harvest a leaf, lettuce, kale, something that's a leafy or a fruit-bearing plant, it would be best to harvest those in morning before noon because all of the energy of that day is up in that part of the plant. And so if you harvest a fruit, when that energy is up in the fruit, during the moon cycle, during the day cycle, then that fruit's going to last longer. It's going to have more shelf stability. It's going to taste better as opposed to harvesting a fruit when all the energy is in the root of the plant. You're just not going to get the, as much juice to the squeeze, if you will. And then vice versa, if you're going to harvest a beet or a carrot, harvest those in the evening time when all the energy has come back from the sky down into the earth, down into the actual body of the vegetable that you actually want. And so, that's your general how you might just work with an already growing plant. But really all the different preps of biodynamics, if I can just get into those for a second, it's a lot of different materials that seem kind of weird, as you will, but really all of them are based on this idea of allowing a plant to sense better and encouraging outward growth during outward movement of energy and encouraging downward growth of roots during that inward-downward cycle. So you would do different things during the morning time when there's an outward expression of energy than you would do in the evening time when there's an inward expression of energy. Just like humans, right? If you're a normal daytime human, you're going to probably drink a coffee first thing in the morning, maybe do a little activity to wake yourself up and then go to work. And then you're going to do something gentle, soothing, go to sleep. If you flip those things and you drink your chamomile tea in the morning, you're going to struggle all day long. And then you drink your coffee in the evening, you're going to sleep horribly. And so the whole system is off just because of the timing at which you put your input into it. And so to get into the kind of the two basic fundamental preparations of biodynamics is one is horn manure. It's cow manure or bison manure packed into a horn, buried underground from fall equinox to spring equinox. And the idea is you are capturing all of those cosmic energies that are moving inward and downward. And when you then spray this, you would use it at a time that's an inward-downward movement of energy. So that would be in the evening to encourage root growth and lateral growth of the plant. And on the other side, we would take that same horn and fill it with silica, which the horn silica is typically from quartz crystals that are smashed into a very fine powder and put into that cow horn and let sit from spring equinox to fall equinox to harvest and capture those summer energies, those outward and upward energies. So whenever we spray the silica preparation, we would do that in the morning because it's an outward, upward expression and it interacts with light. And so that's kind of the gist of how we can acknowledge these moving of forces, and then we can do the appropriate activity at the appropriate time, looking at the biologically dynamic push-pull pumping system that we're in.
I think there's just so much to unpack here, and a couple things that come to mind are some of the best grazers I know, and I think this is instinctive too, they tend to move their livestock first thing in the morning. Mm-hmm. And they just somehow recognize that maybe there's more nutrient density, or maybe the animals recognize that and they get more excited. Mm-hmm. But to open that paddock in the morning is most favorable for the health of the animal versus in the evening, where that energy is maybe in the leaf blades earlier in the day. So I think that's really special. And I also think, as we're like learning these lessons and we're becoming more involved in this agricultural setting, as humans, I feel like our civilization really struggles. We really focus on that outward expansion of energy.
Absolutely.
I mean, all day long. Dude,
All
you
day.
painted the picture where it's like in the morning we get ready to go and then in the evening we wind down. But I think in the reality, most people's experience is freaking flooring it all day long.
And completely focused externally.
Yes.
And there's very little value, at least external value, placed on, hey, you know what? You just sit still, go inward, and just be content.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, what are you doing? You're missing meetings. You're not answering emails. Like, there's no time for that.
Right.
But there's such richness in that slowing down, being intentional. Whereas, right now I think it's a huge disease of our world of, we're creating mass mental health epidemics because everything is external, material. There's 100 different filters on Instagram to make you look prettier and thinner and sexier and whatever, stronger. Whereas there's very little value placed on, who are you internally? How comfortable are you with yourself? Which fears have you processed through?
Absolutely. My wife and I, we always get so frustrated at how business is so focused on growth. Like to start a business, you have to, it's just kind of encoded in the genetics of that world where you have to show month-over-month growth, year-over-year growth, but it's like, where does that stop? Because that cannot be limitless outward expansion. And so I think adopting some of these practices and recognizing that these cycles exist in nature, we are a part of nature, therefore we should practice some of these cycles ourselves. I think it's tremendous permission to allow that internal expansion that we lack.
Absolutely. And this is a conversation that we have within our company. I work with Symbiosis Texas as a regenerative land design firm. It's this question of what is our identity and is this appropriate for us? What is our boundary and where do we define ourselves? Because nothing in nature grows forever. Eventually, even if it's a parasite or a cancer, its host dies and it's done. And so as business owners, it's a real kind of philosophical question moving into, 2024. How do we recreate what business looks like in mirror of the natural world? How do we define what we are and be that to its fullest potential, but move away from this infinite growth model that only benefits shareholders who are sitting somewhere, often not related to the company that's, working away day to day, because that model is what we're coming up against that's pretty much causing our civilization to fail right now.
Yeah, I think it has to do with how do we assign value, or what do we value as a civilization or as a culture? And when you go back to the plant example and the cycles, it's like early in the morning, you could probably speak to this better than I have, but you probably looked at a plant under a refractometer or some kind of tool where you can measure nutrient density increasing. And so what if we measure food production by nutrient density versus just sheer
volume,
mass, right? Yeah. And so the same thing can happen with business and with how we live our lives. It's not about keeping up with the Jones materialism. It's more, what are we doing to build ourselves up and to support our families and our communities and our people and have that quality of life? I think that's just this huge opportunity for expansion as a species.
Yeah. And, going back to your grazers who move animals in the morning, there's so many dynamics that are occurring on top of the energy is in the leaf stalk. Layer on top of that morning dew. And dew is something that, next time you see morning dew, just sit there and take a minute and think about the journey that dew's been on. Because each morning, and dew really moves like ocean tides. It goes up and down from soil to atmosphere multiple times a day, not just from nighttime to morning time, but it's a very mobile form of water. And as it goes up into the atmosphere, it's harvesting and collecting dust and ions from the sands of the Sahara and the fires of the rainforest and the smoke of British Columbia. It's collecting information and material from around the planet that's floating around in these great oceans of air above us. And, some of the biggest amounts of fresh water on planet Earth are in the atmosphere. And so this dew is going up, mingling with that great ocean of fresh water, and then coming back and depositing all that information on our grass. And so, one great benefit is your animals are going to get vastly better hydrated with that type of highly structured water. And they're going to need less of your, water tank water. And they're getting all the energy in the seed head and in the grass. So there's a lot going on with just feeding your animals fresh grass off the ground in the morning versus evening time when there's no dew and all the energy's underground in the root structure.
That's cool. I love probably my favorite thing. You're just invoking this visceral reaction to dew, but it's going out in the morning and taking my shoes off and grounding in that dew, grass, soil matrix. And I think there's no higher connection to what's happening outside. And I feel sorry for the landscapes that are dehydrated and don't even have plant matter growing on them. That water cycle is broken to where that moisture just isn't present. Can you talk a little bit about the nature of, since you got on dew, I want to talk about the morning's chorus or dawn's chorus. I think that's like the most special time to be outside. So maybe someone who's not familiar with that, explain what the dawn's chorus is and what happens in the ecosystem, even coming down to the plant.
Yes, the dawn chorus is a concept that I learned from the Wilderness Awareness School and John Young and the tracker Tom Brown Jr. And it's this notion that around the planet Earth, there is always a preceding band just before sunrise and sunset of birdsong, of that morning chorus. You hear the treetop birds singing, you hear the ground birds making noises. Basically, the whole community is saying, hey, it's morning time. Everybody wake up. We made it. That owl tried to get us again last night, but we made it. And so it's a wonderful time to be outside because, if it's the morning time, you go out when it's perfectly silent, dark, can't hear anything, and just find a spot to sit and be still. And you'll notice that this morning chorus starts to erupt. And then, during sunrise, it's kind of at its cacophony. And one thing that's been absolutely proven is the frequencies of those birds emit a resonant frequency with the stomata, the breathing parts of plants, to encourage those plants to open. So when you don't have birdsong, the plant is less informed about when it should open itself, when it should breathe out, when it should breathe in. And that birdsong is the pre-indicator that the sun is coming up that lets the plant know, okay, go ahead and open up, exchange gases, sun's about to hit you. You're going to get that perfect blend of wonderful, gentle wavelengths. And then you can close back down, prepare for the midday sun. And then in the evening, you're going to get that birdsong indicator again as you're going into that crepuscular evening time. You can take a deep breath again before you go into the cool, cold night maybe. And it's this cycle that's always happening. And, if we can tap into that birdsong, it's a great indicator because when we hear that birdsong at a different time of day, it's a bird alarm. Because typically, when you get the full chorus of birds, it's only at those dusk and dawn times. If you get the full chorus of birds in the midday, something should go off in the back of your mind that's like, what's going on? Usually I only hear that at dusk and dawn. And it might be a rattlesnake in the grass. It might be, a predator, a coyote moving through the forest. In my own experience, twice. Once it indicated a mountain lion behind me, and another time it indicated Cape buffalo in the forest just off to my left, that had I not acknowledged the bird song, I would have walked right into him. I was walking through the forest in Kenya and see a handful of birds move from left to the right. It's midday, hear bird chorus kick off. I was like, uh-oh, that's not normal, and I'm in a very foreign place than my normal environment. So whichever direction those birds are going, I'm going to go also, because they're moving away from something.
Funny.
So I moved as quickly as I could away from whatever they were moving towards, got out of the forest, and then sure enough, 2 minutes later, here come two Cape buffalo that luckily I was far enough away. So the bird chorus is just an incredible indicator for a lot of different things.
Yeah, as a hunter, you also sometimes when you're walking stock and you're on the ground and you're coming close to some deer, and the second you hear a bird call in the middle of the day, your cover's blown. It's bye-bye. By
Go
the
home.
time you hear that, you're just like, shit, I got no chance. Yep. Before the deer even knows, the deer will pick up on that.
Mm-hmm. They're the great lighthouse of the forest.
Right.
Predators coming your way, or you as the predator moving their way.
Well, both way. It's just so cool because when I hear you talk about the bird's chorus and the interconnectedness of just one species, and there's like billions of relationships like this that are happening, and we're only going to be able to recognize a very small fraction of a % of all of this. Bird's chorus is a good example. But in my mind, it kind of shifts the whole, like, what am I doing? What is the purpose? How do I restore, heal, bring land back to a higher level of health and resilience? And to me, it's almost not as much about like these cycles of nature, these soil health principles, but it's about how do I have more energy? How do I bring more energy onto my property at any given point in time? Because those relationships, the symbiotic and even the competitive relationships all complement each other and lift up that system. So if you're a farmer and a rancher and you're like, do a bird count, and you have 3 or 4 species of birds, that sucks. Mm-hmm. Well, what if you manage to increase your bird population to 200 different species? And then all these tangential, interconnected relationships are restored and the whole system elevates in that energy capacity to iterate and to be more complex.
Absolutely. I think, creating more complexity is kind of our role as a steward, creating those shelter belts and those areas that we don't touch or we don't go to, and we just leave to the wild species and energies of the land. And we just let them know that, hey, we're not going to meddle with this particular area. That's just yours. You just be there. You can come and, join the rest of the property as well. But I think what you're mentioning is really what I got a lot out of biodynamics, because it seeks to increase the sense perceivability of plants. As Steiner mentioned, a plant is like a human that's been turned upside down and buried in the ground up to his belly button. And so a plant's sense organs, its nervous system, are underground, like your brain and your nervous system. It's sensing, it's connecting with other fungi and bacteria and tree roots, and the whole thing is communicating underground. And then above ground is its reproductive parts. It's fruits and its seeds, female and male. It's pollens, it's anthers and stamens. And so it's kind of the reciprocal of a human, just upside down. And so with biodynamics, the idea is, how do you create a better sensing plant that can reach out and receive from the natural environment what it needs, since they can't just pick up and go to the refrigerator like we can. They need to be able to sense, perceive as best as possible, so that they can arrive to their fullest potential. And that's really kind of the idea of all the different preparations, are just to encourage different parts of the plant to be able to sense better, to be able to digest better, to be able to thicken their skin and prepare for the heat better. And all of it is looking at preparing the plant for what's to come, as opposed to waiting for the plant to look bad and then reactively try to treat something in kind of a panic emergency.
Yes. Okay, so we're going to get into the biodynamic preparations, but before we do that, just recap. Mm-hmm. we'll try to do it simple so people can wrap their head around what we're talking about. But like some really key principles of biodynamic that we want people to take away. From you, I got one, the earth, the farm, the ranch, the land is its own living organism. It is an entity. And so to perceive it that way, you can work with it differently. You have a different relationship. Number two, I would go on this idea that the interconnectedness of the sun, the moon, the stars, and the cosmos, we take into consideration all that light energy that's coming in and the cycles within that. What am I missing or anything before we jump into the biodynamic preps? Because I feel like the preps are like this huge delineation line, how this is different from organic or regenerative. This is very unique to biodynamics.
And, I think the only other thing that I would add is that, between material life growing, there is this spirit that flows through all things. And that's really what we're trying to encourage more of, to allow more of that spirit, which you can give whichever name is appropriate for your belief structure. But that's what we're trying to bring into our system more. We're not just looking at material growth and weight and volume. We're looking at what's the vitality and the spirit. When you look at many plants during the use of biodynamics, you'll notice that they're not just two-dimensional flat leaves. The things that we typically pick up in the grocery store are two-dimensional flat greens. But when it's growing and when you're using biodynamics, you'll notice that each vein inflates like a hot air balloon. And so now your plant is a full three-dimensional kaleidoscope fractal of fullness. It's bulging to its fullest boundary condition. It can't fit any more in three-dimensionally. And the veins will almost glow like an iridescent if you're looking at it in kind of a foggy day or an evening. And the amount of energy coming off of that plant it's palpable. Like you'll be walking along and you'll catch it out of your corner of your eye and you're like, whoa, that is what kale is supposed to look like. I did not realize it until now. But that's really what we're trying to do. It's more than just the weight of a green plant. It's, the quality, the tangibility, the vitality of the living life force moving in those plants that can then transfer into people and children and nutrition and health.
Yes, that's such a good add-on. And I do recall now Steiner really reflecting on what he kind of saw as a warning sign where humans were becoming diminished or starting to lack a spiritual nature, a spiritual connection. And that lack of spiritualness was that void or that vacuum that was being created was one of the driving forces for our seemingly obsession with consumerism, with consumption, with material possessions. It's trying to fill that spiritual void with something else.
Yeah.
And so the way to return back to that spiritual fullness and that satiation is through food that also contains that same energy, which makes tons of sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into the biodynamic preparations. I know you kind of touched on a couple of them, but can you maybe just run through the lineup and explain how they're used and maybe some other really interesting parts?
Sure. I think I'll just start with I'll start at the end and just say, for folks who this is just a lot of complex stuff that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There are two organizations. There's the Josephine Porter Institute, which you can just purchase field preps from. They make them, they do all the things at the right times, incredible people doing good work. And then there's the biodynamicsource.com. And they're doing the same thing, harvesting the most ethically harvested plants at the appropriate times and putting them together for you. And so before we get into all the specifics, if you just got one bag of stuff to put on your earth, get the Pfeiffer Biodynamic Field and Garden Spray, and it has all of the preparations in it. You just put it in water and you mix it for an hour, and then you put it out. Or if you don't have an hour to mix, go to Biodynamic Source and get their Buffalo Soil Activator. And it has all the biodynamic preps in it. You mix it for 1 minute and put it out, and it's just inoculates your system with all those beneficial things. those beneficial things are. So it starts with the horn manure, which we mentioned. So it's a cow manure or a bison manure packed into a cow horn. And all of these have a frequency, a vibratory effect, and that's really what we're working with. But they also have a beneficial bacteria material effect too. So, when we're putting manure in a horn, putting it underground, it's kind of a strange thing to do, but really what we're doing is creating a microclimate for a specific biology to exist. And so you have horn underground against manure, and horn is the same material as your fingernails. It's high in chitin, and it's a very appropriate medium for growing actinomyces fungi. And so in the end, after you take that out, your manure is no longer this black cone of manure, but it's covered in white actinomyces fungi. And so on one side, it's like, well, wow, if I were to purchase an actinomyces inoculant, that could be relatively expensive. But here I can just make it myself in my backyard underground with a little bit of time. But also there's that frequency of it's not only just beneficial fungi, but it also encapsulates this downward, outward, lateral movement of roots to encourage things to grow down and outward. So then our next prep.
Before we, I just have to tell you my experience.
Yes, please.
Because this is just too trippy. I came in this with an open mind, but also some healthy skepticism. And I remember when I buried my horn, I was like texting you. I was like, Adam, tell me, how do I do this? Where do I bury this? It doesn't really matter. Just find some spot you'll remember. The worst thing that can happen is you forget where you buried your horn. I was like, shit, that'll probably happen 6 months later. But I buried it in the crappiest, most degraded, compacted, hardened, low organic matter soil because it was convenient. It was right next to my house, and I could remember where it was, and it wouldn't get grazed or anything. And when I unearthed it, it had transformed. It was not the same material that it began, and the fact that somehow that actinomycetes inoculated it is still beyond my comprehension, because like I said, there was nothing happening in that soil. And so the actual preparation that came out of the horn too, it was no longer manure. It was actually sweet smelling. I mean, it was very earthy. It felt good to hold. It felt very clean and pure. And it just felt very mineral rich and strong, like humus or something.
Yeah, and I would say that's one of the biggest differences in biodynamics is they really discourage the use of fresh manure. Fresh manure is very water soluble, and it kind of force feeds a plant, whereas something like you just described is so complex and digested and stable that it's a much stronger, more complete nourishment for a plant instead of scooping up manure lagoons and spraying that on a plant. It's a completely different situation.
Absolutely. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay.
But way more concentrated, so you don't need it. When you spread it, the dilution is, you only need a little bit, goes a long way.
That was really probably the first thing that got me into biodynamics. Was my context was we had a well that would only produce 200 gallons of water, and then it would stop, and you'd have to wait 2 hours for it to restart again. So I didn't have much water, and I had a lot of land. My folks had over 100 acres to start playing with. And when I reached out to the various different agriculture universities, all of their solutions were buy X many tons of product per acre and irrigate. And so for me, I was like, man, I don't have much money and I don't have very good water. And here comes biodynamics that says all you need is a gram of this material for 5 acres, something that fits in the palm of your hand. And by the way, if you use a homeopathic dilution of that, mix that into water for an hour and then take, 1 liter of that, dilute it by 10. Do that 10 times and you have such a minute amount of that material in. You're really just dealing with a pattern, a blueprint of what it once was. And so for me, just from a logical, cost-effective way, I was like, hey, if I can put less material on my property, with the very limited amount of water that I have, and it does something better than a lot of material, well, sign me up. I'll drink that Kool-Aid all day long.
Yes, it's a great selling point. And I've heard you say that if it seems too maybe intimidating to spread it on your property too, if you have livestock, you can put it in their water trough, right?
Yeah, you can just put the preps right into, let's say, a cheesecloth bag and put it in their water source. And again, these, they're actual materials, but the materials are holding a frequency. And that's really what we're putting out on land or putting through an animal. We're increasing the digestive frequencies and the sensing frequencies and the restful frequencies so that everything is doing better. And really, if you have livestock, feeding them like a 20 choice mineral plus biodynamics in their water, you're just allowing your animal to do all the work for you.
Insane.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. I mean, putting things through animals, and that's like a do nothing farmer situation.
Yeah. Cool.
All you got to move them is in the morning.
Yeah. When you said that, it blew my mind. It's like, what? How did I never understand? And then I started thinking about, well, what if I give my bison, what if I can trick them into eating deep-rooted perennial grass seeds and forbs?
Absolutely.
Have them spread those too.
We had a little, we had a property owner's cattle get into all of our Native American seed. And so it was like, the problem is the solution. On one side, it was like, oh no, they ate 20 pounds or maybe it was more seed. And sure enough, when you followed them around the next couple of weeks, those cow patties were so rich in native perennials, much more than the seed drill that we'd put out and all the effort and diesel that we'd put into them. Just feed them to the animals and they took care of the rest.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Let's get back.
That's all right. So that was the horn manure. Horn manure is a great earthly, rich, feminine growth, downward lateral force. The silica preparation is that quartz crystal ground into a fine dust, buried in the horn, and it's doing two different things. One, silica is very difficult to find in a bioavailable form. And so, again, you're putting that silica underground and letting the natural fungi, bacteria, ecosystem work on it. Basically like a baby bird. Mama bird is pre-digesting all that very fine silica so that when you finally pull it out, it's more available to a plant. Also, silica holds information. All of the technology that surrounds us, our Silicon Valley, making chips, silicon is an incredible conduit for just holding information and moving light. And so how we can use it is when we spray this in the morning, it's like spraying out 1 billion small prisms. And so now instead of one light source, the sun, hitting one aspect of a plant, since you're spraying the silica up in the air, that plant is getting light refracted and reflected from 1 billion different tiny, tiny prisms from all aspects around it, surround it, above it, below it. And it's a very different quality of light. It's very soothing and complex light that it's getting. And so that's kind of our silica prep. It works with light and encourages upward vertical growth. And so typically if you have, let's say, corn or wheat that's very short and it just won't get to that height, then it's usually deficient in silica because silica really grows the cell walls of a plant so that it can grow taller and stronger. I'll jump to our other silica prep, which is horsetail. So you may have seen horsetail in your bog areas or your riparian zones down by the river. It's this very segmented plant. It's very coarse. It's also very high in silica. And so, the horn silica gets buried underground for summertime. And this is a plant silica. So it gets boiled and then poured into a bucket for 7 to 14 days to ferment. And then through that boiling activity and then followed by the fermentation, it liberates that silica into a more usable, available form. And then we would just take that and spray it in the air in the morning as well. to try to create those stronger cell walls and subtler interaction with light.
Yeah. The name of the game to me, like I already said, is harvesting energy, getting more energy on your property, light energy for the source of communication and passing information. So this gets me excited. This is like the idea of, man, I wish I could have 1 billion birds on my property for a day. What would that do for the plants? Here, you putting 1 billion crystals in the air for a day.
And, if you're looking for a very tangible, rapid way to bring in silica to your property and you're working on a large scale, basalt dust is kind of your next quickest, fastest remineralization effect. We use the Canipa, Texas mine in just outside of Gonzales, Texas, and we just get their basalt screenings. And so for $12 a ton, you can get, typically one semi will carry 25 tons of basalt dust, and then we'll just mix that in, 1 scoop of basalt, 1 scoop of compost, and then go kind of broad scale, distribute that on the highest part of the property, and then just let gravity and water distribute it the rest of the way. But that's a real quick way to remineralize and get a high available source of silica on property as well.
Good idea.
So moving on to the next preparation. So each of the preparations moving forward are a plant material packed inside of an animal material. And Steiner would look at which plants had similar qualities as which animals, and specifically which animal organs, because all of these come back to we're trying to create a microclimate for beneficial bacteria and life to form. And so if you weren't looking at it like that, it might sound a little strange. Here with the yarrow preparation, the 502 preparation, it's yarrow flowers packed into a buck's bladder. A buck is a deer, a male deer. And so it looks at yarrow as a plant that branches almost infinitely. Its Latin name is Achille millifolium because it has like 1 million different foliages. And it's packed into the buck's bladder because a buck is kind of associated with, whereas manure is very associated with gravity. Cattle and bison are very heavy. Well, cattle more so. They're very heavy and gravity-based. A deer is very flighty. It's almost more associated with levity than gravity. If you ever watch it jump, it just levitates right over that 8-foot fence, and it doesn't look like it struggled. You never hear it grunt. And so you take yarrow flowers and you pack it into a buck's bladder, and you put that above ground for 6 months and then bury it underground for 6 months. And in the end, you get something that's, according to our little biodynamic preparation list, it interacts with the Venus forces, and it has strong radiating powers. It refreshes and quickens the soil by harnessing more distant cosmic substances. They come into the earth in homeopathic quantities. But on a material level, if you measure the beneficial and quantity of bacterias in just yarrow flowers and in just the inside of a buck's bladder before being combined, and then after this, the amount of beneficial bacterias increases by a fold of 1,000. So you're just creating another life form, a beneficial inoculant that allows the plants to sense and get what they need and use what they got better.
Very cool. The sum of the whole is greater than the parts.
Exactly. So then we move into the chamomile preparation, biodynamic preparation 503. And as I mentioned earlier, chamomile is a very soothing, kind of your nightcap, calm you down. It's associated with calcium and magnesium. And so for land, it helps it digest. It helps it rest. So it'd be an appropriate thing to put on in the fall time to help the stubble digest and become, stable nutrients again for springtime. Then we move into the biodynamic 504, which is stinging nettle. And stinging nettle, which is different than thistle, but stinging nettle is generally grown next to riparian areas, wet spots, boggy areas.
Would bull nettle be a stinging nettle, or is that different?
It's different for these purposes.
Okay.
You know, Steiner specifically said the Urtica dioica, which is a particular stinging nettle, but I think there's opportunity for experimentation. I think using a bull nettle and burying it underground for a year, pulling it out, doing a little test trial of our local plants is kind of that next step. And like, how do we take these principles and then apply them to our local context and see if maybe it's just as good?
Right.
So stinging nettle, we use that kind of one, it's just incredibly nutritive. It's got an incredible array of bioavailable nutrition, kind of like kelp. If you've ever used kelp sprays on plants, does a great amount of good for it. But also it has formic acid, which is found in fire ants. And so how we might use this is just before the summer heat hits its apex, we could go ahead and spray on a stinging nettle preparation onto the plants. And for the plant, it's getting this formic acid on it. And it's kind of a reminder of like, hey guys, summer is just around the corner and we're going to have hotter days. So here's a little heat for you. Adapt.
Sure.
And so give it 2 weeks to kind of thicken its cuticle, strengthen its stem, get ready for the big summer sun.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, you get those 100-degree days and your plants just thrive right through it instead of wilt for the next 2 weeks until they kind of barely survive it.
Nice.
And so that's where all these are, looking at the cycles, what's about to happen in the plant's life, and how can we prepare it for what it's about to go through.
Could you use that for like an early frost too? Like a maybe early season frost to just kind of help a plant push through it?
Absolutely. The best things for frosts would be the stinging nettle, kelp, just a liquid kelp. Just has tons of available enzymes to help plants get through any of that. And the valerian preparation, which I'll talk about here in just a second. And I'll just jump ahead. Valerian, as you mentioned with human nutrition, some of the listeners and watchers might be aware of the valerian root. And valerian root's found for a sleep aid. It'll really put you to sleep. But the flower has the complete opposite quality. So the flower is very exciting. And so the valerian prep is the flower harvested, fermented into a juice, and sprayed. And so it excites everything. It's kind of like if you and some friends were around a campfire on a freezing night and someone broke out the whiskey, they didn't necessarily warm you up physically, but they excited you enough that you didn't really care that it was cold and you made it through a good night. So by spraying out that valerian juice on plants just before a freeze excites the system so much that it can get through those a little bit easier. Very cool. And so with a kelp, stinging nettle, and valerian, that's a great pre-freeze, pre-frost, kind of get everybody through the nice. Struggle.
Yeah, cool. Keep the growing season going.
Exactly. Yeah. A lot in Texas, we get these peach trees that will flower in February, and then we get that next hard freeze after the flowering, and then you lost that. So that would be a great opportunity for that.
Good idea.
Yeah. The next prep is the oak bark preparation. So an oak tree is a very strong calcium accumulator. One of the reasons why the wood is so heavy, anyone who's had a cedar fire versus an oak fire, there's a lot of captured solar energy in that oak wood, and it's very durable and it lasts a long time. So oak bark is very high in calcium. We pack that oak bark into an animal skull, like a cow or a pig skull, and bury it into a boggy area, something that's very wet and very anaerobic. And in those anaerobic environments, you have very aggressive mineralizing bacterias. The things that smell like sulfur and smell like methane, they're really aggressively breaking apart bonds and making them available. So after leaving this underground in a wet area for a year, you pull it out, and your inoculant is something that is very good at breaking apart calcium bonds. and making things available, but also protecting against molds and rots, because calcium is kind of your king of nutrients, and you need it in order for anything else to move. So if you have any fungal issues or rusts, using the oak bark on that is a really good option for just general immune support and health.
Nice.
And then lastly, the dandelion prep. Dandelion root, some people drink it as a nutritive because it's very mineral rich. And so dandelions have really deep tap roots that pull up minerals from the deep soils. And so this particular preparation helps roots pull up and communicate minerals from the deep soils up to the plant material. And so if you're a plant and you got roots and you got a top and you're photosynthesizing, but you get a little inoculated so that your roots are being better roots, then, everybody wins. And so dandelion is also a really good liver tonic. It clears out your liver. And so it helps the land move and use and kind of purge anything that's no longer needed, like old car batteries.
Yeah.
But basically, it's kind of this like liver cleansing quality of we're going to take in toxins and we're going to move toxins, and we're not going to allow those things to just, stagnate and accumulate and become detrimental. And so each of these different preps are supporting a different quality of the plant. And so generally, all these preps are either put into a compost pile, and then we use that compost that's inoculated, or they're put into the Pfeiffer field spray or that biodynamic bison soil activator.
Yep.
And so most people, unless they're at a high level of biodynamics, aren't using the individual preps.
Mm-hmm.
They're just using the mixed sprays. And, if you were to do nothing else, spray the field and garden spray on the roots, on the soil, on the stalk of the plants, and then the next morning, spray your silica spray in the air. And then poof, you're doing biodynamics. You did it. You resensitized your land. You probably resensitized yourself a little bit because you're now inoculated with these interesting
Good point.
things. And you might, notice qualities in your life shift a little bit.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. Do you mind if we take a pee break?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Pee break.
I slammed so much. Don't stop the recording.
24.
Don't stop the recording. I was like, if it was gonna be like 10 minutes, 15 minutes,
Yeah.
But I'm like starting to sweat. Hey Morgan.
Yo.
She asked. I think she's still running.
I got the timestamp.
Okay. Tell her we're not.
Deep pee break. What's going on, brother? How are you? Good, man. Good to see you.
We're still going, right?
We're still going. I got the timestamp where we popped up for a sec. Oh man. How you been, Mike?
Good, man. Keeping busy. Yourself?
Same, man. We're slowing down a little bit now that it's kind of getting into the holidays, and which is really nice because fall is generally pretty crazy, but as we get into wintertime, it's like everything kind of chills out a little bit, so it's really nice. But yeah, we got a guy here that he's a biodynamic farmer. And so it's like so Taylor is a regenerative bison rancher.
Okay.
He's regenerative principles, but we're starting to like mess around with like biodynamics. It's basically like, it's very woo-woo. It's like trying to like harness like the like solar energies and like try to like be very cognizant of like the energies like on our land and trying to like use that to help us like grow crops and make for like more resilient crops and animals. And so it's very, very, very interesting, but it's very dense too at the same time. So
right on.
But yeah, man.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. You got any plans for Thanksgiving?
Yeah. We're from South Texas, so a
Yeah.
lot of our family's there, but my sister-in-law and just moved her family up to San Antonio. They bought a house up there,
Nice.
and they're kind of doing a housewarming / Thanksgiving, so the whole family's going over. So
Cool. What
should be
part of
nice.
South Texas were you raised in?
Brownsville, Rio Grande Valley.
No shit. My
Yeah,
mom's
where?
from Brownsville.
Really?
Yeah, just crazy. That's very strange.
Interesting.
Do you know any one of? I mean, it's a long shot. It's it's definitely growing, but the Cavazos family have you ever heard of that?
So many Cavazos down there. Yeah.
There's a ton. But yeah, she was born and raised in Brownsville, and then moved out of Brownsville when she was in like late high school. So
Huh.
still got a ton of family out there, and
Really?
yeah,
Cool.
yeah, they we're like, hey, we'll come see y'all. They're like, no, we'll come to Austin. I'm like, all right, like that's
Yeah.
fine. Like we're happy to come see you guys.
That was me growing up. I was like, I'm getting out of here.
yeah, exactly.
I was always coming up here to see shows and stuff, and when I was in high school,
Yeah.
went to college up here and just stayed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No shit. I'll have to tell my mom that I met somebody from
Yeah.
somebody from Brownsville. She'll love that.
Yeah. I'm actually from a little town next to Brownsville, but I spent most of my time in Brownsville, but San Benito.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah. So she might know my last name, Moody.
I'll have to
Because-
ask her.
My grandfather owned a bunch of supermarkets there and has like streets named after
Yeah.
him and shit. So,
You know Charlie Crockett? Do you know who that is?
well, that sounds familiar.
He's from San Benito.
The singer, right?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
You ever have you ever like listened to his stuff?
Yeah, he has a song about the valley, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's becoming a real big deal in the country music space. Yeah, he's from San Benito.
Hey, let's go.
Is that like you just create the beautiful thing and then hand it off to someone else? Or like,
Pretty much.
okay.
Oh,
Never got the chance
we're still
to
going.
introduce
Sorry.
myself.
Hey, we had to go to the
Morgan
bathroom.
Weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Morgan, nice to
Okay,
meet you. I'm
thank
Adam.
Very nice to meet you, Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I do a lot of the content marketing, and then I'm the chef at Four Signature.
In-house chef.
Right on. I thought when you snuck in, you looked familiar.
Yeah.
All right. So
Okay,
Pee break here.
so we're doing really good here. Maybe just we'll pick it up and just kind of reiterate, hey, if you don't like, this can be intimidating to make it home.
Mm-hmm.
All these can be like one more time purchased, and then we'll get into the almanac. And
Sure.
yeah, and then on the almanac, in your email, you said something about Amazon. I buy shit from Amazon too, but I try not to. So maybe as the first option, don't list Amazon.
Perfect.
I do the same thing, but I'm like, damn it, why did I just plug Amazon? Fuck these guys.
I'll just encourage, look for this book.
Yeah, it's got to be on one of the biodynamic websites, right?
Yeah. I think so.
Okay. All right. Sorry. So go for it whenever you're ready. So it can be really intimidating to make this stuff. You got to be rather hardcore to go out there and harvest a buck and dry out the bladder and then harvest yarrow, dehydrate it, put it in there, let it sit for so long. Can you reiterate that? Don't be intimidating. Don't let perfection get in the way of progress. Where can you get this stuff?
Absolutely. I myself have made the horn silica, the horn manure, and actually the yarrow and the oak. But it is a labor of love. And the Josephine Porter Institute every year has a prep making class. If you feel so inspired, you can just join them for it. Or you can just purchase it from their website, support good people doing good stuff, or that Biodynamic Source website. You know, great motivated elders of our community of how do we grow better foods, acknowledging that most people just need to purchase a thing for $30 that shows up, throw it in a bucket of water, stir it as long as you feel compelled to. Generally, anything over an hour is going to have diminishing returns. But if you can stir that for 30 minutes to an hour, one, it's just a very lovely meditative thing to do that is very new for most of us, just being still and being with a bucket of water for an hour.
Yeah.
I found it to be very enjoyable. As someone who has a busy body and hard time slowing down, to have a function for an hour in one place was really enjoyable. But yeah, just buy it, use it, get it out. Don't think about any of this other stuff unless you feel compelled, and then you're doing it. You don't have to worry about where anything is in the cosmos. You just bought a $30 thing and it's on your land, and now you're doing it.
Very cool. And if you want to start with one, BD500, the horn manure, just reach out, email some random rancher
There you go.
and ask for
Yeah.
30 gallons of poop.
And who knows what relationship and series of life events will unfold from there.
Possibly a good one.
Exactly.
Hopefully. Okay, so now we're talking about preparations. Can we talk about timing, some kind of biodynamic calendar,
Sure.
almanac that can help us make decisions on when it's appropriate?
Absolutely. So I'll mention the last preparation that's very timing specific, which is the Three Kings preparation. It's to be done from 11:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. on New Year's Eve in America. So, December 31st, January 1st, and then sprayed around the property edge of your property as kind of a spiritual boundary, if you will. And I've really enjoyed doing that preparation. For one, it's made many of conversation starters at New Year's Eve parties. One, you kind of think about your consumption of substances during that time. And you go off and you're grinding these three materials in a mortar and pestle for an hour, and then a couple days later you mix it in with warm water and spray it around your property. But it really brings a lot of great conversations into like, what's going on here? Why are you doing this?
Yes.
And I've always been interested in kind of the mythology and stories around those gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Why of all things did the three wise men bring those? But I've definitely found that to be a beautiful addition to myself and to the property, and really increase intuition, if you will. And so getting into the timing of things, Steiner mentioned that specific time of winter is when the most rich spiritual energies are coming into Earth from the greater cosmos. Because we have these Earth energies moving from Earth outward to the atmosphere and beyond. And then we have everything else moving inward towards the Earth, which that everything else is a lot,
Mm-hmm.
And so the almanac, the Maria Thune Biodynamic Almanac, specifically the North American version, is just a great resource because you don't have to really get embedded into what's going on in the world. You can literally just go to the back page, pull out this wonderful little document, and here you flip to your month, and here we are, November 10th, and it's a root day. So roots are brown, flowers are yellow, leaves are blue, and fruits are red. So generally, how this came to being is a really incredible feat of a devout scientist, Maria Thune. And she grew up in a farming community, and she'd hear the old timers talk about this constellation or this moon cycle is why we do this seeding or that harvesting. And so she took it upon herself to see if there was any substance to that. And so for 30 years, she planted radishes and beets. And every single 28 days, she would harvest that radish and beet, and she would clean it methodically, and she would weigh all the different parts of the plant. And after doing that for a full year, she then took the United States naval star charts, which are exactly where the moon and the celestial bodies are, in case of a electromagnetic pulse that shut down our satellites and our communication systems. Big battleships need to know how to get back to harbor. And so it's a very specific location of where these celestial bodies are. And then she correlated them, which is just a vast amount of work and devotion. And she found that during certain configurations of the celestial bodies, leaves would grow better. In others, roots would grow better. In others, flowers would express best. And in others, fruits would grow best. And you can do this yourself. The first experiment that I would encourage doing is get the calendar, And then plant radishes and beets on a root day, and plant those exact same seeds on a shoot day. And what I've found every single time is the ones planted on a shoot day will just provide copious amounts of greens. You know, you're just harvesting beet greens for steaming and eating all day long. And then when you finally get to picking the root, and obviously, you know, if you're going to do a test, don't be harvesting all of your greens and then suspect that the beet is so small. Have your little test plot that you're not interfering with. But every time we notice that you'll get tons of shoots, but the root is this tiny little bean at the end of it all. You're like, wow, how did that tiny root make all those greens? And on vice versa, you plant it on a root day, and the little shrubby, spindly shoots that come out of it, you're like, oh man, that is struggling. That's not doing very well at all. And then when you finally kind of pick it out of empathy, like, let me just end this thing's life, you pick it up and here's a softball root of a beet or a radish on there. And so it really makes a big difference. I noticed that whenever we acknowledge this calendar and plant accordingly to it, you know, and realistically, everyone just has generally like a planting week. You know, you got your seeds and you got your plant and everything's ready. And so how I would do this is, you know, Sunday to Monday are fruit days, and Tuesday, Wednesday are root days, Thursday, Friday, flowers, and Saturday through Monday is leaf. So just separate out your seed mixes, do a little bit of planting each of those days instead of trying to do it all in one day. And then the whole system just thrives better because it's planted on the appropriate time for that, given the context for greater growth. And even though every time I do this, it blows my mind that, you know, we're not only just planting with soil health principles and good quality seed, that we're acknowledging this greater celestial context that we're floating through at infinite speeds.
Yes, I love that. We're going to have to launch this podcast on a fruiting day, so I'll look at the calendar and reference that. Okay. But I just adored the ancient wisdom that Maria Thune just devoted her time and resources into. And it's just like, we take this for granted so much. You have like these celestial entities, these stars, these constellations that are hundreds of thousands of light years away. And light is like always moving. It's like limitless. It never stops moving. And so we're like, we don't you just look up and you're like, yeah, cool. There's like Orion's belt. There's the Big Dipper. But like the plants, they're actually they're harnessing the energy that's coming through hundreds of thousands of years of traveling through space. And when you think about the dewdrop coming up into the upper atmosphere and coming back down and carrying all that information back to the soil, I feel like the same thing is happening to that light energy that's coming in.
Yeah, they're just feeding off all that information in variety of different ways. And as long as they have the ability to know what to do with it, and sensible enough, you know, because you kind of think about each of these plants as like a little child that if it's loved and encouraged, then it continues to like seek outward and play and express itself. And if that comes upon trauma or devastation in some variety of ways, it shuts down and no longer has the ability to access that full potential. And so that's what we're trying to do, is allow our plants and our people to feel fully expressed and to express their full potential and to work with us.
So if someone is get some of the preparations, also invest in the calendar, but they're just overanalyzing like, oh, which date should I do it on? They could almost have like a lack of action based on too much processing. And so, I mean, in your mind, they're two separate things. You can use them together, but is it okay to just put the freaking preparations out versus keep them in your closet?
Daytime, nighttime, winter, summer, just get it out.
It's always going to be better than like perfectly working with the celestial bodies.
Yeah. You know, when I started, the only time that I had available was middle of July, summer drought, Texas, 104-degree days. So I was like, well, I'm not going to do it during the daytime because I'll have heat stroke. So I'm just going to mix this Pfeiffer Field and Garden in a 55-gallon bucket during night just to keep my own self and sanity intact. And so stirred that bucket for an hour, put it in a small little spray rig, sprayed it around our property. And by morning, the next morning, there was an increase in precipitation. And strangely enough, a giant black spinning cloud above our barn where I'd been stirring these preps for 3 hours throughout the nighttime. And so that was one of the first things that I was like, you know what? I don't understand a lot about this world, but there is a black cloud swirling above the barn that I stirred these materials in for 3 hours last night. So there's something to this, and the fascinating thing was, when you're stirring material in a 55-gallon bucket, this was the very first experience that I had. So I thought, well, if you're going to stir a little bit, stirring a lot is better. So instead of 1 5-gallon bucket, let's stir 3 55-gallon buckets.
Those are big buckets for reference.
So, my body felt like it had been hit by a train the next day. But
oh man, I bet you look like a witch at night doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I figured out that if you suspend the stirring stick, it takes some of the effort off of your muscles. But yeah, very witchy.
Uh-huh.
But the next morning, after creating this downward vortices for 3 hours, what I looked up and experienced was a funnel cloud above our barn that was an upward vortices. And it was kind of this acknowledgement of the universe of like, yep, as above, so below. You create a downward vortex, nature will mirror it with an upward vortices. And small intentional things can have a large, broader impact. And so that really encouraged me to just keep going.
That's cool. That's an experience that is so profound and moving, but is also not unique to you doing this. It happened to me. It happens to multiple people that dip their toe into this world.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the gateway to recognizing that there's something greater that we can be a part of. And I think one really exciting thing is that, as you alluded to, you can kind of change what's happening atmospherically. You can alter weather patterns. And I think that's a great segue for the Agnihotra, which
Sure.
you're a big proponent of. You've introduced me to it. And
So I'll just mention before we go into there, just to mention the atmospheric change potential of the sequential spraying system. So we've talked about all the different preps, but Hugh Lovell, the writer of Quantum Agriculture, who's since passed, a great biodynamic elder, he really got famous traveling around Australia making it rain from exactly what we've just discussed. So, first thing, they'd mix the biodynamic corn manure and spray first thing in the morning. You have an upward expression of a prep during an outward expression energetically of the earth. And then in the evening, he'd spray the biodynamic corn manure. Inward expression of the preparation during a inward expression of the energetic cycle of the day. The very next morning, you would have prepared your horsetail, boil it, ferment it, and you'd spray that in the morning. So now you have another silica preparation outward during an outward energetic time. And then the next evening, you'd spray the biodynamic barrel compost, which is basically just horn manure mixed with basalt and eggshells, which was a creation of Maria Thunes. And so you're getting another inward expression during a downward energetic cycle. And then finally, on the third day, you spray honey mixed in water, which interacts with light. And then in the evening, you mix milk mixed with water. And so you're acknowledging, kind of tipping your hat to the daily energetic inward-outward pulsing cycle and using these preparations at the appropriate time to pump complexity that's appropriate to that lever that's occurring. And every time I've ever done it, it always rains on that third day. No matter if it's middle of summer, not an ounce of precipitation in, the 2-week forecast or not, it always precipitates. It might be a little drizzle, it might be a fog bank, and sometimes it's full rain clouds. So biodynamics was the first time that I ever experienced a form of farming that acknowledges the atmosphere and that we can change the quality of the atmosphere, which is what the plant is consuming. The plant is opening up its leaf parts and it's consuming, it's breathing in the atmosphere, and that is then turning into mobile carbon and polysaccharides that are injected into the soil. And so by changing the atmosphere, you can impact the soil and the plant beneficially. The only other place that I found that working with atmosphere was in the India tradition of Agnihotra. And they refer to it as Homa farming, which is basically biodynamics plus Agnihotra. And Agnihotra, if you go on awakeninnerfire.com or .org, my dear friend Gautam Bodhipudi has put together a whole series of training tabs and how to do this and what it is and where to purchase the materials. But basically what it is it's an ancient Vedic tradition from some of the oldest living texts that we know of you take a copper pyramid of a very specific proportion and you burn cow manure, dried cow manure soaked in ghee at the exact second of sunrise and sunset. And at that second of sunrise and sunset, you add a small amount of rice covered in ghee and you say a Sanskrit mantra. So you have a lot of kind of alchemical energies occurring. At that very second of sunrise and sunset, you have a prisming effect of the sun's energies. And, you know, when you see light go through a prism, you see that whole rainbow effect. And so now you have each individual spectrum of light available to be interacted with. And the interesting thing about the Agnihotra pyramid is it resonates with the color green. And as we know, light in plants, life has a lot of green in it. And so you're resonating with a natural biorhythm. And the use of Sanskrit words, Sanskrit is the most ancient language that we know to exist, and it is based off of the geometry of sound. So, you know, when you say something like Om, if you were to say that over a very shallow dish of water, you'll see a pattern emerge from that sound. If you look into cymatics is the study of sound vibrations' effect on matter. And, you know, even in some of your ancient religious texts, you know, first was the word, first was a sound, a primordial sound that then everything else came into existence out of. So it's kind of tapping into these similar ideas of as we utter a primordial sound that influences matter, as we're burning this fire at sunrise and sunset, and we're injecting charged particles into the atmosphere, we have a local atmospheric change effect that then that atmosphere that the plants consume is benefited. And one of the interesting things, if you think about, you know, we're burning cow manure, which is already fermented earth, trees, grass, rock, dirt. And so we're releasing this very broken down nature back into nature, covered in ghee, and it's a charged particle. And so charged particles draw in other particles to it. And so it's been found that, you know, repeated use of Agnihotra morning, evening time for 2 weeks or more create a local climate effect of that particular farm. And it can be measured, weather patterns shift a little bit. There's a little bit more precipitation, more dew on the ground, more mist banks in the morning, whereas the monocropped fields nearby don't have those gentle precipitation changes and more of a moderation of the climate, less hots, less extreme colds, but very subtly.
Yes. When you came out to the ranch a couple weeks back and we had 15 or so guests from the community come out and you were teaching some of these biodynamic principles, we did the Agnihotra ceremony process. And I mean, this was a shared experience with other people that I was speaking to afterwards. It was a hot day. I mean, blazing hot and full sun. And when we did this, I damn near thought it was going to rain on us. I don't know if you remember that because you were like in the zone of being a teacher, creating content where we were more consuming it, but it was instant shift. And 2 days ago at my daughter's school, they did a like a Veterans Day ceremony a little bit early,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a cloudy day, and they had this at the very end of the ceremony, a bagpipe came out, and he was playing Amazing Grace, and I think the bagpipe is, as you explained it, like this beautiful primordial geometric sound that's just, if you don't feel it, I mean, it almost makes me cry every time I hear someone playing a bagpipe.
Every time.
And as soon as he started playing the bagpipe, I swear there was a opening in the atmosphere where the sun shined down for that 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I don't know. John Muir talks about how in nature, he had a famous saying, maybe he wasn't the first to say it, but you pull at one string and you recognize everything else is connected, kind of like a spider web.
Yeah.
But I think there's something to the connectedness here, that you're pulling that string down at the earth, the surface of the soil, and it's connected to everything, even up higher into the atmosphere in the cosmos.
And, speaking of higher in the atmosphere, there have been studies done with Agnihotra putting, tracers on the manure that's burnt, and it's been located over 8 miles above the Earth's surface in the high atmosphere. So you're really, truly like punching a hole through the lower levels of atmosphere to allow whatever higher forces are coming from the celestial astral realm.
That's phenomenal.
Into your local environment.
Yeah, I think when we think of water, you throw a stone in the water and you can really appreciate that when that stone is going through the water, waves of energy are moving.
Those pressure waves.
Throughout the entire system. And you don't exactly perceive energy going upward doing the same thing because it's not as visual.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is. It's like that 3-dimensional spider web. It's like the Black Widow web, where it's just this system that goes in all directions.
Yep. Any sound wave is going to go omnidirectionally until it hits something. So that's exactly what it's doing. We're taking this little resonating pyramid that's resonating a beneficial frequency that resonates in tune with natural systems and cycles. And just like any musician knows, if you play a note on a guitar on this side of the room and the other guitar on the other side of the room is tuned the same, the string on the guitar is going to resonate, even if you don't touch it.
There you go.
Just because of that sympathetic resonance that occurs. So the idea is the pyramid and everything that we're doing, the words, the vibrations, the time of day is all creating a resonance with a local natural biorhythm, and attuning you, the operator, into your nature and into your land more. And the beautiful thing about this is, currently we're in process of creating a documentary just about people around the world using this process. And we're finding people from every religious context, belief structure, ethnicity, culture, location on the planet that are just using it as a tool. It doesn't have to become anything larger than that. It's just a tool. We do it a specific time. We do a specific way, and it works. And you don't have to believe about anything else than that. It's just a tool from ancient primordial times that someone knew how to do it. Similar to why are there thousands of pyramids across the planet Earth right now? Yep. That everyone kind of scratches their heads and is like, I don't know.
That's so good.
We live in a pretty special time where we can really contemplate, some of these ancient technologies and pull them in and use them appropriately. And I think that's where I've always been super curious. If it seems like conventional agriculture leads to a lot of sadness. Land, people, debts. And so for a long time, I've just looked at what are the available, simple, cheap, effective technologies and tools that we could just do to have a beneficial effect. And this is kind of the toolbox I've found.
It's a great toolbox, and I'm gonna start practicing Agnihotra more frequently after that last experience, that last time we shared, because it was good stuff.
I've definitely found if you can stick to doing it every day for 2 weeks, you will absolutely notice something different in your life in a very good way.
Yeah.
Serendipities and good things just happen to come across your path a little bit more easily.
Absolutely. So, kind of as we wrap this up, what can we learn about ourselves through some of these principles and lessons illuminated through the practices of biodynamics?
I think one question is how much of my day-to-day is focused externally on the outward material world in front of us, in front of our senses. We rely so heavily on our eyeballs and our sight, and it's such a limited sense perceivable organ that, we're only picking up 0.01% of the available electromagnetic spectrum with our eyeballs. And there's a lot more going on. So the question is, how much am I focused outward versus how much am I focused inward? And can I shift inward a little bit more often? Somehow, some way, sit for 5 minutes silently under a tree, connect your feet to the bare earth, and, wonder how you might be useful. Ponder these open-ended questions that don't have any specific answer, but make you turn your sense organs inward just for a hot second and ponder. I think we are deficient in time-valued pondering our own thoughts and possibilities. So I would say that's been one thing that biodynamics has really encouraged me of, like, there are these outward forces, these material things outside of you, and there's this inner world in you that's equally as rich. And what's that look like? It's going to look different and feel different for every single person. But I think that's, Steiner really talked about how we need to evolve into spiritual scientists. So we need to acknowledge the spirit that flows through all things and find its wisdom inside of us, however that emerges, as well as be incredibly diligent scientists like Maria Thune, really discovering the principles of life in front of us and how can we work with that as well as what's inside of us and express both to its fullest potential.
Yes. So much with agriculture and regenerative agriculture, we focused on the outward, but again, reflecting on the inward. And I think really to recognize our own highest potential, it's really how much energy, how much light can we hold within ourselves, which comes from that moment of silence and that inward reflection, that inward development. And when we light up ourselves, we light up our species, we light up our landscape, we light up the ecosystem. And I think it was even Zach Bush who kind of commented that, like, when we light up planet Earth, the rest of the cosmos are paying attention. And so there's this opportunity for a phase shift of higher connectedness, higher awareness of this gift that we're given to co-create with nature and to be a part of this system.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that shift of from competitor to cooperator and to co-creator, that's a beautiful new narrative to slip into. And as you mentioned earlier, really using that inner space to define what we want, and then really defining clearly what that is and not be distracted by the don't wants along the way. Because there's always going to be something, vying for your attention. There's multi-billion-dollar organizations that specify in getting your attention. So I feel like being able to go through the fray of life without having your attention snatched away is kind of a new superpower.
Absolutely.
In a hyper busy world.
Oh, totally, man. So where does hope grow in your mind?
I think in this turning inward, there is a great amount of hope, because right now so much of our world is materialist science that looks at the thing that we can study under a microscope is the end of it all. Whereas when we can really acknowledge that there is this entire beautiful soul-filled universe inside of each of us, and we can acknowledge that and spend time with that and find how we can find others that share that and continue to grow in cooperation with nature, ask for permission when we're doing things, and start to work better in right relationship instead of this loud, angry human thing that just destroys and burns wherever we go, into a true land steward that has a more beautiful relationship with ourself, with our partners and our relationships and our families around us. We can, if someone's having a a rough behavior, we can see that as an indicator, instead of a blame and a conflict that emerges. But seeing the world as something's being presented to me as an indicator of something else. How can I be curious about this and find something useful to do with it, with a generally empathetic heart and mind that are connected, and know that the entire natural system wants to work with us, and we just have to open ourselves to that possibility, and we become an interconnected part of this incredible cosmic system instead of one lonely individual trying to grow a food, which is really hard.
Yeah. Well said. Well, thank you, Adam. Another great conversation. I don't even feel like that was too weird, but maybe we're just our own unique audience. We'll have to see. I loved it.
Hopefully folks are like, you know what, I'm just going to buy the thing, spray the thing, and forget about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to provide all your contact information, and people can just reach out to you afterwards.
Perfect.
So thank you so much, sir. It was a really fun conversation.
It's always good to see you.
Yeah, man. Take care. That was amazing. I did want to get you to do, if you don't mind, I was going to put it at the end of the episode, that like directional prayer.
Oh, yeah.
You're comfortable?
Sure.
I don't even know what directions are what in here, but we could at least run through it. I didn't do the mic like behind you. That was a great Where Hope Grows answer. We just started asking that at the end.
Oh, nice.
And it hasn't gone that well.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's always
like,
pessimistic. Yeah,
there's a lot of that.
Okay, can you try again? It's worse the next time.
Right.
That was a good one. I loved it.
All right. I'll just keep all this so that I'll probably just sit in front of the mic and just talk through it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Because it's gonna sound crazy if you don't do it like that.
Should I give any precursor to it, or are you gonna kind of do some like? I'll probably just say, like in traditional fashion, gonna end this thing with a prayer. This time, my man Adam Russell's gonna do it. He starts off, like working with land. Perfect.
By going through this.
Okay.
Yeah, these guys are magical.
Okay. So an introduction and appreciation from ourselves to this land in which we are standing. Facing east, we give gratitude to the rising sun and the inspiration that each new day brings us, and each new opportunity arrives fresh on our doorstep to allow us an opportunity to have a choice. Gratitude to the east and all that it brings. Gratitude to the water that resides in the high atmosphere, these great oceans of fresh water that travel our planet, collecting information, seeds and pollens and sands from so far away to bring and distribute in our local bioregion, wherever we may be. Gratitude to the rains that move in the air and allow us to breathe them in, and those waters become our lungs and our blood. And that blood moves through our kidneys and becomes our urine and returns back to the earth. Gratitude for the cycle of water that travels and transports itself from high atmosphere to deep earth for eons, and our place in that as we get to experience it for a very short amount of time. Gratitude to our ancestors, 7 generations behind and 7 generations ahead, those that brought us into this world and loved and worked and bled and struggled and strived to bring something better and newer for each new generation that brought us here today. Gratitude to those grandparents that loved us so well and brought our parents into existence so that we may create a future that our great-great-great-grandchildren can be proud of, to bring them and allow them to fully step into their fullest potential in a new and different world than we know today. Gratitude to the voices and the names and the unnamed people of this land that came before us. Here in Central Texas, the Apache, the Comanche, the Tonkawa, the many tribes whose names I do not know, those hands and feet, those hearts and minds that came here before us and that strived to live and eke out an existence or thrived beyond imagination with a connected co-creative capacity to this land. May our actions honor them and work with those desires to continue to work well and in right relationship with this land. Gratitude to nature, however it may present itself, trees and seeds, songs and noises of insects. Gratitude for that orchestra that is around us, that fills our eyes with beauty and our ears with harmony, and our olfactory senses, our noses and our tongues with tastes and smells. Gratitude for this incredible sea of biodiversity that we get to participate in on a daily basis. And moving to the south, gratitude for the heat of summer and the strong feel of the sun as it brings forward photons from so far away that land upon awaiting leaves that photosynthesize fully through their chloroplasts and chlorophyll to create polysaccharide sugars that are injected into our soils in the form of nutrition for beneficial fungi and bacteria, beneficial viruses, and all things living that are supporting and growing the vibrant world in front of us. Gratitude to the west, to the winds that blow in change and newness and bring in contrast to our life and keep things interesting as we move through our plans and replanning. Gratitude to the storm cycles and to the pollens and the pollinators, the insects that bring information to us, whether we're doing well or whether we have room for improvement. And gratitude to the north, to the Mother Earth that allows us to get our hands dirty and to try and to fail and to move forward, failing forward more and trying harder and learning and being gentle on ourselves and being there to allow us to sleep deeply and rest so that we can continue to try tomorrow. Gratitude to the many connections and interconnectedness that the earth allows, those beautiful places that we've been allowed to wander and experience and have formative memories. For those reasons why many of us spend so much time outside, and for those who haven't had those experiences, may we wish that more people find their way back to the earth and to sit comfortably in silence and to just soak it in. That beautiful co-creative capacity, that caring that the natural world has for us and desires to work with us. And to that fifth sacred thing, that spirit that moves through and around all material, whatever name we may give that, gratitude for our inspiration and for our voice and for our try hardness to work with it every day and to surround ourselves with community and loved ones that believe in the fact that we can be better each day and we have yet to see our full potential on this earth. Thank you.
Well done, brother. That was perfect. Does that change every time a little bit?
Yeah.
It's pretty, there's parts of it that I know you're doing over and over again.
Yeah.
Pretty consistent.
Generally, it'll be the 4 directions and the 4 elements and kind of fill in what feels generally inspiring along the way.
Love it. That's going to be a good one. We've been just doing more like prayer in our family, but kind of like not from reading from a book, thou shalt not type thing. Mm-hmm. And trying to get kids involved in it. And a lot of it's reflection on gratitude. But this one that we landed on, Rin, has this book about it's like an old Mother Goose, like old nursery rhymes, and we adopted it, and it's so fun because we'll go around the table and even Rin can participate as 2 years old. And so you say, like, I'll usually start and you think of one thing that you saw that day and that like makes you feel good. And so I'll be like, I saw a bumblebee and the bumblebee saw me. God bless the bumblebee, God bless me. And then like everyone goes around and says what they saw that day, and it's just a really cool fun prayer.
That's
like
awesome.
everyone can get down with.
Like the Wilderness Awareness School would do Thanksgivings. So like before you eat, it would be like, gratitude to the, you'd have whatever food, gratitude to the farmer who woke up and built this on a rainy day and planted this thing, and just kind of like tracking, like whatever's in this, like gratitude to the coffee bean, wherever it's grown, and the sun that hits that, and the people that, pick that with their calloused hands, and just, doesn't have to be any kind of religious context. It's just like,
totally.
Thanks for the things that are around us.
Oh man, that's like I don't know, maybe arguably the root of happiness.
Yeah.
It's just having that appreciation for gratitude.
I totally agree.
Hard to meet stoked people in life that are got a chip on their shoulder.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, my friend Melissa, who's a big mountain climber, she just always refers to team try hard. Doesn't matter what we're doing or how often we're failing. We're just trying hard every day.
Oh man, that's fun.